case that we're talking about is Sears versus Learmont. It was a case in Mississippi where the damages in the case actually exceeded what the legislature has passed as a cap on damages, on non-economic damages in Mississippi. The case was in federal court, and so it actually went to the Fifth Circuit on the question of whether or not caps on non-economic damages in Mississippi was going to be constitutional under the Mississippi Constitution. The Fifth Circuit doesn't deal in state law, so what they had to do was something that they do in some instances, which is certify a question to the Mississippi Supreme Court. In other words, the Fifth Circuit asked the Mississippi Supreme Court if these caps are constitutional, because it had never been ruled on by the Mississippi Supreme Court. And so the Fifth Circuit sends this question to the Mississippi Supreme Court a couple of years ago, and they did briefing, and it went to the Mississippi Supreme Court. And almost a year ago now, the Mississippi Supreme Court actually refused to make a decision in the case. They just said, we're not going to decide the question that you've asked us to decide, and sent it back to the Fifth Circuit. The decision you're talking about now is the case as it's gone back to the Fifth Circuit, and because the Fifth Circuit didn't have any guidance from the Mississippi Supreme Court, they've determined that they're not going to rule that the caps are unconstitutional at this point. That still leaves open the question as to what the Mississippi Supreme Court will do when the right case comes to them. You can't choose the cases that come before you. You have to wait for the case to come. And so they're in the period of waiting for that case to come before them at the court, and they'll decide at some point. But that's the nature of courts. You know, legislators can make law, the governor can decide what he wants to work on, but the court has to sit there and just wait for a case that fits a certain scenario. You can't sort of manufacture a case to come before you. You just have to sit and wait. Anybody who can tell you what the Supreme Court's going to do is lying to you. I think they're going to look at it at some point, and I think they'll make a decision. And you know, that's what's tough about these cases. I mean, they sometimes they're very difficult to decide because they have a lot of emotional appeal. Say a young child is disfigured for life. I mean, it's not easy to say, oh yeah, we're just going to cap the damages, because you know you're in that situation where I mean, are we going to hold wrongdoers accountable, or will society step in and cover the costs of damages at some point? We've got to make a decision as a society how we're going to handle those. But simply putting a cap doesn't make the damages go away. It just says that the person who caused the injury is not going to have to pay anymore. Society still may have to cover the costs that someone has incurred as a result of an accident. The interesting thing about it is that, you know, these tort reform things only don't affect Mississippi. I mean, most other states have tried these things. Other states that have looked at these damages have ruled them to be unconstitutional. Missouri, I think, is probably the latest one, a very conservative state dominated by Republicans, but yet when they look at this tort reform statute under the Constitution, even conservative courts have held these damages caps to be unconstitutional. And Georgia, I think, was the same, and we think that you know there's really not much of a difference between Mississippi's Constitution and those others, and a fair application of the statute to the Constitution seems to indicate that it would probably be unconstitutional.